Brothers and sisters, let us keep our attention to Brother Nicolas. Again, the title is Our Director. Welcome.
Thank you, Brother Ramazani, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be back. It feels like just yesterday that I was a member here, but it's been 9+ years. A lot has changed for many of us with children and marriages and all sorts of other things. Well, bring the greetings of the Richmond Chapel. It's really, many of you know many people there, and like vice versa, and it's really nice to be able to, I'm excited to go back and tell them that we came here. And you're more than welcome. Anytime you're in Virginia, we'd love to have you at the chapel. So today I want to talk about two different types of directing that happens in our lives. How we direct our own lives and how God directs our lives. We're going to talk about faith and works. Our lives are not what they may seem, how we all make mistakes, and how our lives should benefit others. So first we're going to talk about faith and works and how we direct our own lives. As an example, and how I kind of started thinking about this was the last few, it's been a week now, but we had the online Christadelphian Bible School, which many of you attended or know people that attended, and I was a big part of that. It was a lot of work. It was something I did last year and was very blessed to be able to do again this year. I was blessed to work with an amazing committee, amazing coordinators, youth committee, and most importantly for me was my tech directors, and they were the team of people that helped run all of these events. Two of your own members here were part of my team. Chris Runge was new to our team, and Mark was a very important return member from last year. And it was great. And the group, the amount of people that, not only the people that came, but the amount of people that supported it, that spoke. Ramazani gave a wonderful class, I assume. It was in Swahili, so I don't know. But the feedback, the amount of views of his class, that people are watching the recording, the people that showed up for his class. There was a roundtable discussion in Swahili. We also had Farsi and Telugu as different language options. The people that from across the world that came into the classes live. We have, right now we're at about, I think, 16 or 17,000 total views of all of the classes, both the live classes and the recording classes. And it's just wonderful. It was wonderful to be a part of that. But being a part of that was not an easy thing. It wasn't just I showed up and I helped run it all. We had on Saturdays, our Saturday assemblies, we had people from all over the world. We had a keynote speaker from Vietnam, the Philippines, South Africa, and Singapore. And as well as those, we also had videos submitted from people all across the world. We had music, we had verses being read, we had live things happening, and that was a lot to juggle at the same time. Like I said, this wasn't something that I was able to just pick up and do. I couldn't say to Nathan, hey, go figure out, well, Nathan would know it. I couldn't say to Uncle Dan, hey, go run all of this by yourself with no experience. And while he could do it, if he practiced and learned, that's not what he excels at. And this is something I'm very fortunate to excel at, and I've had this experience. Some of my experience, I did all the website stuff, and my very first website I ever built was here. It was Uncle Elwood's dentist that needed a website, and I worked with him. He was an interesting dentist, but it was a great experience. That was my very first website I ever built. And also, Nathan is the first person I ever knew that used Zoom. When he was down at the Bible Education Center, they did research, they were streaming their classes before anybody else was streaming classes pretty much, and they used Zoom. And because of those connection and those points of contact, and from that point, I've learned to get to where I am today, I was able to help serve with a wonderful team. So, let me see what I was saying here. So I had to put in the work, but I also had to have faith. It wasn't something that I was just blindly, well, I know how to use Zoom, so I'll be fine. I prayed a lot. I had a number of times during, especially these Saturday events, that there's all sorts of things happening that I'm like, well, God, this is you directing me. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I trust that it's going to work out. So with that, that was the faith, that I had to have that faith. But like I said, I've had to have these works. I couldn't just say, well, God, I need to speak in Swahili. I have to give a class in Swahili, so you better teach me how to speak Swahili. No, that's not something that we can do. We do have to put in that work. And we have to prepare. We have to be ready for whatever that is that's coming ahead of us. In Proverbs 6, we know the passage, go to the Anto sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. So like the ant, we in our lives need to prepare for whatever that is that's coming ahead, whether it be a known entity with running a Zoom class or giving an exhortation or teaching a Sunday school or preparing a meal for a number of people. You have to prepare for that. And in Proverbs 20, we also know the passage, the sluggard does not plow in the autumn, he will seek at harvest and have nothing. We have to prepare smartly. We have to do things that make sense. We have to have that logic. We can't just ask God for rain when we know that rain cannot come. We have to take some action and maybe go water those plants ourselves. We can't just assume God's going to water our garden. We need to take that action. And in turn, we prepare too for that future goal of Christ returning. In Matthew 24, it says, therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So sometimes there are things we are preparing for that we know of. We know that we're going to have, talking about the gathering, preparing for food. We have to prepare for that. That's a known thing. But there are things too we have to prepare for the gathering. Something could happen that we don't expect, but we have to have that knowledge and be prepared. So that was about directing our lives. That was faith and works, how that's important to have both of those to be able to have a strong direction in our life. Next, we're going to talk about our lives are not always what they may seem to be. So again, talking about the OCBS, you as an attendee would have seen what hopefully was a generally seamless thing. But on my side, I was sitting up in my little office with the cats walking across my keyboard and the children sometimes coming and singing loudly while I was trying to concentrate. But I had to be ready to get what was coming next. I was on the backside of things, making sure it was running. I had to communicate to the presenters. Sometimes mere seconds before he said a number, I had forgotten to get him that number, so I had to type to him very quickly, and he was able to present that. And that's something too. Part of this exhortation came from, I watched recently the movie Broadcast News. It's from the 80s. Many of you probably haven't seen it. It was a pretty good movie, and it's all about how the news, there's all this communication, there's all this stuff that happens, all the support team for a single person, or maybe two people. So that is how, in this turn, or in this situation, our lives are not what they all may seem to be. It may look like this person is doing it all by themselves, but there's all these people, all this stuff that's happening behind them. We may look like our lives are put together. It may look like our Instagram that we only go to the zoo and milk cows and have happy lives, that we never have any fears or struggles with anything. But we all know that there are problems. There's falling in the mud. There's getting your face covered in chocolate, and there's, for not only children, but Uncle Dan too, there's these situations that may not be pretty. There's the temper tantrums for no apparent reason. There's struggles as adults, that we struggle financially, that we struggle spiritually, that we struggle mentally, that we struggle physically. It's terrible to have a physical affliction that you have no control over outside of going to doctors and time and hoping that your body can heal. But it's so important to acknowledge that in other people's lives. It's important to know that everyone has messiness in their lives. We may not outwardly show it. We may, like I said, our social media posts may not see that. I haven't seen Martin for years in person, and I see his social media, and I have a certain picture of what his world's like. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that at all. It's wonderful to be able to share these wonderful events, but it's important to say, hey, maybe how you doing? How are things going? You don't have to just comment on these beautiful things, just to check up on people and make sure they're doing okay, because we all struggle. And I know that's something I sometimes sort of put these people, these families, these elders in our community up on a pedestal as well. They've got it together. They've had the experience. They've gone through the struggles, but they're fine now. And that's never true. That's, we as humans are sinful and have this struggles in our lives. One thing I vividly remember as a child was Simeon and I were always told that we were good kids outside of our home. We were, well, you're just so well behaved, you never fight, this, that, and the other. And so I remember saying to my mom, verbatim, everyone says we're such good kids. Why do we get in trouble for things that other kids don't get in trouble for? Whether it be, well, Ben and Luke, my cousins, are hitting each other, but they're fine. Like, they don't get in trouble. And I just look at Simeon wrong, and I get in trouble. But that's how life works. There's a spectrum of how people interact. You can't expect everybody to have that same expectations. And just because somebody looks like they're okay or not okay doesn't mean we know the whole story. So it's so important that we have to acknowledge that brother or sister or friend, a parent, a spouse, they may not have things as together as they look, because nobody does, and that those kind words can help them. So now I want to talk about how in directing our lives, we all make mistakes. When I was running the OCBS events, I often made mistakes. Sometimes I forgot to unmute someone or show the correct video. But instead of getting down on myself and just being very frustrated so I couldn't move forward, I had to take a deep breath, say a little prayer, and move on. I was recently talking to a pianist at our ecclesia, and she's a young pianist. She hasn't played often with large groups. And I talked about how when you're playing with a group, you are going to make mistakes. Nathan makes mistakes sometimes. But when you're playing, you can't go back and fix that. You have a group of people that you're leading. You have a group of people that are following you. It is important to acknowledge those mistakes and work on them. Maybe after the fact you come back and you do practice ahead of time, but you have to keep going. You have to keep moving forward and taking those steps forward. Even if you take 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, that's still 1 step forward. So, as in these presentations that I was doing, or music, or in life, we have to do the best we can to learn from our missteps, strengthen our faith, and reach out to others for help and support. When this pianist, this young sister, I have more experience than her. It's not me judging her and telling her that she's wrong. It's me giving my praise to her, but also support in that situation so she can feel like what she is doing is helping others. Our life's direction is to, hang on a sec. So about the moving forward, so David is a great example of moving forward in his life. He sinned with Bathsheba. There's no question and no doubt that what he did was a sin. And that's in 2 Samuel 12. And he was punished for that. He was punished and he got consequences. But through God's grace, David himself was given his life, and he had to accept his consequences and grow in faith. And that, like us, we have to accept those consequences, whatever they may be in our lives, and grow from them. So our life's direction is to do what we believe best follows God's word. It's not to do our best at following God's word, then when we fail and sin, to give up. We have to direct our lives, even with the sin in our lives, towards God's kingdom, because we know that through his grace, we'll be granted a place in it. So the next portion that I'd like to discuss is how our lives should benefit others. And these are all things that we all know, and these are all things that are very practical. And in writing this exhortation, I was able to I love writing exhortations for myself even more than others, because you're able to sort of put these things together. And it doesn't have to be an exhortation. It can be a Sunday school. It can be just a small devotion that you give to a small group. And I think that's something we should all take advantage of, to use these as things for ourselves. But in serving others, if we have that ability, we have to find those opportunities. God doesn't call us to love only those in other countries and only serve them. Jesus says in Mark 12, the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. And I'm only speaking for myself in this, but I know when I am struggling in my life, even if I have a massive amount of stresses, if I reach out a helping hand to others, to people close to me, to anybody is wonderful, but in this case, to people that are close to me, it unburdens my cares and lightens the load of that other person as well as myself. It's those actions that, even if we're stressed, even if we're having a tough day or week or month or year, we're helping others can often unburden us. At the Richmond Chapel, there's a committee that organizes what's called a meal train. And I know Aunt Sharon has done this kind of stuff. I'm sure lots of others too here in Chicago. But it's a group of people that signs up to bring food to people in need. They can have gone through a surgery, going through a loss in their life, struggling with something, that they reach out to somebody in the ecclesia. Most commonly, it's for a new child. When somebody has a new child, a family has a child. So our family has been both the recipients and the givers of these meal trains. Con does the cooking. I often do the driving to get the food there, but it's something that we're working together to help each other, a very practical thing. It's wonderful to quote Bible verses. It's wonderful to give exhortations, but often it's that casserole that can mean more to people. It can move past that, well, I'm just this person you see on a Sunday or maybe a Wednesday. It's this person that cares for you and wants to feed you, because we all need food. We all need this in our lives. And it's one of humankind's most powerful gifts, that food. We have in Genesis 18, we know the story of Sarah feeding the angels. We know the story of Jesus feeding thousands. And even other religions have this idea of serving others. Every religion has it, but I was looking up because, and I think Adam was really into Greek mythology, but there's a story, and I won't tell the whole story, but there's a story of some Greek god came off of Mount Olympus and went to some people and they didn't give him food, and then went to a poor farmer and they got food, and that farmer was blessed. And to me, that you look at these things that we have in our Bible, so many stories that are wonderful, but when they cross those boundaries, when they cross other religions that are saying these same type of stories, it's something that humans need. In Greek, there's actually a word, it's called xenia, that's guest friendship. It's caring for others, whether they be guests in our church, in our family members, people that are nearby. in a way that can benefit them physically, can benefit them spiritually, can benefit them mentally. And it's so important for any culture. And that, to me, strikes home as these things, so much of what we believe in the Bible are not just Christian beliefs. It's not just biblical beliefs. It's humans need this. We need that physical touch, that physical, here's some food to help you move another day. And that's something in our lives, we're directing these things. It's us that needs to do that. God isn't the one that's going to make the casserole and give it to the family that just had a baby. It's us that has to do that. So now I want to talk about how God directs our lives. I spoke to my brother Simeon recently, and he's a film and commercial director, and he said to put the job of a director is to put all of the parts in place and trust that the others will do their part. So as a film director, as you guys can imagine or know if you've ever done any sort of directing or even managing is very similar, you aren't doing everything. You're directing a group of people to do things, but you aren't doing everything physically yourself. God doesn't live our lives for us. He doesn't tell us what to eat, what to wear, who to speak to. He gives us some directions, but he's not telling us every single part of our lives. And that's a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful thing that we have this free will to be able to do that within his direction. He rarely puts his foot down in our lives in an unavoidable way. There are times after the fact we may see, oh, well, there's how God worked in our lives. But he's rarely putting such a roadblock that we have no choice but to follow what he says. And so then it's our responsibility to learn from God's word and to do our best to follow his commands. So I want to make clear, in no way am I saying I'm God in any way. But when I was working with the online Bible school, I had to do this. I had to direct people in a way to empower them to make decisions that were good for them and for the people that they were helping. I had to give them the tools to do their jobs. I put together documentation, I held training sessions, I was an on-call support, but I wasn't the one actually doing those jobs. And God, too, gives us that. He gives us documentation. He gives us the Bible. He gives us this resource that we can go to. He gives us training sessions, weekly exhortations, Bible classes, Bible schools, Sunday schools, even just conversation with those around us that are spiritually minded are ways for us to train ourselves. And he's always on call. He's always there. We can always ask him. He's not me that when the brother that lives in the UK is trying to get in touch with me and forgets that I'm 5 hours behind him and it's 3 a.m, I'm not going to be there. But God is always there. He doesn't have time zones. He doesn't have hours that he's available or not. With all that, though, it's still our responsibility to take advantage of that. I could have given Mark all these things for him to be able to run a class correctly. But if he didn't take anything, if he didn't get the information on how to contact the brothers or sisters he was working with, and he didn't pick that up, that's not my responsibility. I gave him that. And that's the same for God. It's not God's responsibility. He's given us so many things. It's our responsibility to pick that up and find ways to work with that. We too need to be able to work together. And this is something we all know from our jobs, from school, from whatever it is that we're doing. We need to work together because that too is how God directs us. In Matthew 18 it says, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among them." So when we're together with people, we can do greater things than we alone can do. And that's something that I struggle with. I feel often that I can do the best job. I'm the best one at doing whatever this may be. And it was wonderful, not to pick Mark out as the only tech director, but he's the only one here, to see his interactions with some of these speakers that were interactions that I wasn't able to do, that I'm not able to do. I don't have the same personality as Mark. We all have different personalities. We all have different ways. And working together to be able to help others is such a wonderful thing. So, in speaking of working together, in the past year, we've all been at home, and some of you may have watched some of the championship games, with the Dodgers winning the World Series, Buccaneers winning the Super Bowl, Lightning winning the Stanley Cup, and recently the Bucks winning the NBA Finals, and even more recently, the Olympics. And with all these wonderful things, we see these sports players, we see these gymnasts and divers and hockey players and whatnot, but often we sort of miss their coaches. We miss the people that are there supporting them. We miss the teammates. We see Giannis as a Bucks player who's an amazing basketball player, but he didn't do it by himself. He had a team around him. He had people on his team that he maybe only played in practice. He had trainers and coaches. He had all of this staff behind him to be able to help him. And God, too, is our coach. He's our director. He gives us the tools, but he's not the only one that is able to give us these tools. We shouldn't only rely on God as our spiritual support. We need to have that family around us, our physical family, our spiritual family, our resources, listening to music that encourages us, reading books that encourages us, finding ways to not only have one single person or one single entity that is helping us in our lives. In 1 Corinthians 12, it says, "Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is part of it." We have this body that together we can grow and strengthen ourselves. So, as you can probably tell by now in my exhortation, I love analogies. And sometimes, more often than not actually, when Connor and I are arguing about something, she tells me I need to stop using analogies and get to the point. So hopefully you're not too tired, but I want to talk about one more analogy as we get close to the end of our exhortation here. So last night, Adam and I went and played disc golf. It was really fun. And if you guys haven't played, these are disc golf discs. They're different than normal Frisbees. They have even different Frisbees. This one's a putter, this one's mid-range. And it was really fun. It was a time that we could hang out. Walk around in beautiful field, Sunrise Park out in Bartlett, maybe. And the basic goal, as you can imagine with the name disc golf, is you're throwing Frisbees to go to different holes. And the holes are baskets, these metal things. You may have seen them in parks. Usually between 200 and 500 feet between where you start and your goal. And there are obstacles in the way. There's trees, there's forests, there's people walking around, there's rocks, there's all sorts of things. There's water is the scariest obstacle because obviously if you throw it in the water, you may not be able to get it back. And if you want more, you should all go play with Adam. He would love it. Or ask him about it. He's learning and it's a fun activity. So with all that, I'll use my last analogy of my talk here. So when a disc is thrown, there's a certain trajectory. There's a certain way it's thrown. I throw it differently than Adam, but it can get to the same point. You have to account for the wind. You have to account for obstacles or distance you're trying to get to. In our lives, we're the one throwing our lives. We're the one pushing our lives towards some goal, whether it be a huge goal of becoming the most wonderful pianist in the world, or it's just waking up earlier in the morning, something I struggle with. And there's obstacles. There's things that are between us and that goal. Even if it's, hey, I want to have a good conversation with my daughter this morning. That's a goal, and there's some point of beginning and end to that goal. And we have to use our prior knowledge and experience to be able to do that. I can't give Joanna a disc and say, go throw this 350 feet. She has to work a lot. She has to grow up. She has to gain more muscle. She has to get to that point to be able to do that. Now, she can get a little bit of the way, and in our lives, we may have that too. We may have this wonderful goal, but hey, we need to set shorter goals before we can get to that bigger thing. God gives us directions. He gives us how we're going to get to that point. He gives us tools, he gives us resources to be able to get to that point, to that next goal. Sometimes in our lives, we may pull wide right or hit a tree or land in the water, but we have to keep going. In our lives, when God gives us these resources, these tools of here's the Bible, here's these wonderful stories, here's this motivation, we have to be the ones that pick ourselves up and shoot towards whatever that goal may be. In Matthew 7, it says, "But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." God doesn't say, this is going to be easy. He doesn't say, well, you'll be fine. You don't have to really practice. You don't really have to you're not going to ever struggle. You're going to have this perfect life. It's a very hard thing to do. We have a very focused goal that we're trying to get to. And we shouldn't expect our lives to be easy. We shouldn't, the Bible that's given to us isn't the solution to everything written out perfectly. We have to be able to look at it and learn and do our best to avoid those pitfalls and to follow that road, but there will be pitfalls and there will be twists and turns that we can't solve without God. So I've talked about how we direct our lives, how faith and works are necessary, how our lives are not always what they may seem to be, how we all make mistakes, how our lives can benefit others. Talked about how God directs our lives. He gives us the tools to go out and follow his commands, and how by relying on God, we're responsible to rely on others. We're part of a team working together for that greater good. So before we close, I want to talk about a few Bible examples of characters and how they direct their lives. And these are simple examples we can all think of, but they're things that it's so important to think of. And as my kids have been getting older, sometimes it's those simple stories that really can strengthen us, I've found. Joseph, in Genesis 37, we're introduced to Joseph as one of the 12 brothers. He had a coat of many colors. He was thrown into a pit, sold to Egypt, served Potiphar, thrown into prison, raised to second command, and eventually had the opportunity to reunite with his brothers. He very easily could have given up at any point. He could have despaired in the pit. He could have just served Potiphar poorly. He could have given up in prison, but he kept his faith. He knew that God was directing his life and that he too was making choices that were directing his life. He had to play an uncomfortable role of an overbearing official with his brothers, knowing that it was not the right time to show him his true self. He had to trust that God was helping him direct his life. He had faith that the tools that God gave him and the position that God put him in would be for the greater good. We look at Ruth. Ruth left her homeland. She went to a foreign land because she knew that Naomi and Naomi's God were worth following. She had to direct her actions in a very uncomfortable fashion. She had to stoop low to gather the wheat from Boaz's fields. She had to listen to Naomi when Naomi suggested to lay at Boaz's feet. She had to let Naomi and Naomi's God help direct her path. But she had to take action. It wasn't just God magically laying these things out. She had to take action to become part of the lineage of Jesus. We see Esther. Esther had to play a very specific role in the court of Ahasuerus. She had to trust that God was directing her life. She had to know when to use her power and when not to. She had to know when to stay quiet. She trusted God, but she also took actions herself. She didn't blindly try to force God to make the decisions in her life. She had faith that the decisions she made were directed by her faith in God. And finally, as we consider Christ's sacrifice, we can see so many parts of how God directed his life and how Jesus had faith that God was directing his life. From a young age, Jesus studied the word of his Father. He knew what God was directing him to do, but it was still his responsibility to not give in to temptation. When his disciples encouraged him to go to Jerusalem, he knew that the direction of his life, it wasn't the right thing to do at that point. And lastly, at the Last Supper, he knew what to do to encourage and strengthen not only his disciples, but us today, as we can look back and see how Jesus directed his life in such a perfect manner that we try to emulate every day. And then finally, he knew that he needed to talk to God. In the Garden of Gethsemane, we can imagine the type of prayer that Christ had. And that's what the reading Ramazani did this morning in Psalms 23, to me is a very powerful psalm that we all know very well. From a young age we learn it. And it's us praying to God. And it may have been Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane thinking of it and praying to God to help direct his path. So Psalm 23 says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." So like Jesus, we are the directors in our own lives, and that direction should always be led by God, with the hope that we gain eternal life through God's grace. And as it says in Hebrews 4, let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Thank you.